my friends, it's Dan. Welcome back. Welcome to another plastic miniature review, this time for the, I think, highly anticipated human heavy infantry for the Oathmark range, produced by North Star. And as with all of my sponsored content, I want you guys to know up front that this is sponsored. North Star sent this to me to check out with you guys. So thank you yet again to North Star for your ongoing support here. A particular thanks for getting this to me early. This is now actually the second set. The Cultist 3 that we looked at earlier in this month was the first, but this is the second one that they got over to me ahead of a wider release. We can get this information out to the community as quickly as possible. So thank you yet again for your support here. If it wasn't clear then, this is a sprue review. A couple of disclaimers here at the beginning too, I guess. This is a sprue review, which are for sets that we've identified that are a single sprue repeated multiple times, so we can check out just the one sprue together, and I can give you a very good idea of what's going to come inside of the box. It just means I don't have the physical box, but I do have 2 copies of this sprue, which is handy, because that's maybe the only limitation of sprue reviews I've found, is that sometimes in the kit bashing phase, I run out of bodies, so it's nice to have a second sprue in this instance. I guess the second disclaimer is that if you're totally new here, unfamiliar with my reviews, a particularly warm welcome. The kind of blueprint here we're going to go through is to look at this sprue up close. I'll give you breakdowns on all of the bits that are on it. We're going to assemble the figures. I just alluded to some of the kit bashing I'd like to do with all of the human sets from North Star that we've been reviewing. If you've been watching in real time, we've been reviewing for the last week and a half or so. Once that's done, we're going to do some scale comparisons with different manufacturers that I've got in my collection, and then I'll give you my final thoughts. So if you're unfamiliar with Oathmark, I suppose you should know at least that it is a mass battles fantasy game, sort of in a Tolkien-esque world, and the rule set is produced by Osprey, and the miniatures for it are produced by North Star, which is why you'll see Osprey listed on the sprue, as well as North Star down here at the bottom. So it's a kind of joint venture in that way. And I love the aesthetic. I've talked about this probably in all of my Oathmark reviews, that it's a really nice grounded fantasy aesthetic that serves as a solid counterpart to some of the more high concept, fantastical designs that we see from companies like Mantic, certainly Games Workshop these days. This feels much grittier, much more real, like it could have existed at some point in our history. So I really dig that. And one other cool aspect of the Oathmark range is that almost all sets, almost all infantry sets that is, get a similar treatment that mirrors the rule set, but you get a light, a medium, and heavy version of the same subject matter. We see that with the dwarves, we see that with the elves, and now the humans. We look at their light infantry, their medium infantry, and here we are with the heavy infantry. So as the name implies, you would expect the heavy infantry to have larger, heavier duty weapons, more armor on them, more enclosed like helmets, things of that nature. So I mentioned I don't have the box for this, but if you were to pick up a box for yourself, what you're going to get are 30 miniatures, and there are 5 miniatures per sprue, so you'll get 6 of these sprues, and you're also going to get 3 copies of these Renadra flat bases. So these are flat, they're always green, but these 25mm square bases. And they come kind of on sprues like this. This is the 25x50 variant, so you can imagine just 10 of these small ones instead of 5 of these rectangular ones. So you're going to get 30 bases, enough for everybody, and as I said, 6 copies then of this sprue. So I have maybe an observation and a critique that I want to get out of the way here, out of the gates. The observation is that, I'll just show you here, we're going to go through, do my normal close-up shots of everything. But I thought these were going to be heavier. And by heavier, I mean like more plate, because we see that on certainly their orcs. We see that with their elf heavy infantry. They had like plate cuirasses, some like sculpted plate greaves. These, at a glance, before we even go into the detail, look almost more like medium infantry. But I actually realized on reflection that the human range is generally lighter equipped than the elf range, than the orcs, because the human medium infantry that we took a look at a week ago, again, if you're watching these in real time, this is a mild conversion, but the body, it's got a little bit of studding on the tunic that he's wearing, but there's no chainmail on these figures, which is a stark contrast to like the dwarf medium infantry, the elf medium infantry, even the orc medium infantry have not only chainmail, but like the orcs even have some plate sculpted onto them. The elves are completely coated in like a chainmail cuirass. I realize it would be kind of strange to have your medium infantry be functionally unarmored and then jump all the way up to like enclosed plate. So it makes sense, I think, that they've gone with this direction to have these be something between a medium and a heavy version of like what we've seen from some of their other factions within the Oathmark range. And I realize we'll get to this toward the end of the video too, but I also think that that makes them more versatile, perhaps from a kit bashing standpoint, to use these in a whole host of different ways, which, as I said, we'll get to toward the end. The only critique I have here, again out of the gates, is that this sprue is smaller than some of the other heavy sets that we've looked at. Again, more recently, the elf heavy infantry, the orc heavy infantry that we looked at last fall, and I actually had to go back and consult my notes for those two sets. What I found though is that those other two sets had more heads. Again, we'll get to all like the specific bits breakdowns. This is just sort of to set the stage for you. This one comes with 10 heads. The elf heavy infantry came with 12, and the orc heavy infantry actually came with 14. So 10 heads is fine. It meets my minimum threshold, a 2-to-1 ratio of heads to bodies, but it is necessarily more limiting. And the other thing it doesn't come with that the other two sets did, you'll notice maybe, is that there's no scabbards. There's no like loose daggers, sword scabbards. We see that on both the orc heavy and the elf heavy infantry sets, which is another quirk of the human range. Actually, I was looking at my other notes, and none of the human sets actually come with sword scabbards, which initially I had chalked up to some of them are earlier sets, like the human medium infantry. That's not a huge deal. They did have like daggers, but no sword scabbards. But there's another instance here of a newer set that also doesn't come with sword scabbards. So anyway, that's not a big deal. I actually hate painting sword scabbards, but if that is something that bothers you, it's something to be aware of. You're gonna have to source some sword scabbards of your own. Anyway, enough chit chat. Let's get down to business here. So let's do a shot of the front and the back of the sprue. My normal production notes for North Star apply here, which is that both of the sprues that they sent me look nice and clean. These are brand new sculpts, so you wouldn't expect to see much in the way of mold lines. There's a little seam, like on some of the finer bits on the side of the figure, where you would expect, but I mean, that's like, you could clean that with a fingernail, right? No issues at all. But the nice tight sculpting, nice and crisp. Let's start with these bodies here. So I mentioned in my kind of intro ramble there that, again, initially I had expected a little more plate armor on these guys. So I'll kind of rotate around. You can see that what they've done here is gone with a kind of like 12th century aesthetic, I think, with a surcoat over, it looks like some mail peeking out. So maybe they could have like had a longer mail skirt there, or maybe have mail like covering the feet instead of these boots. But as I also said, I think there was a deliberate choice here, like we saw with the Cultist 3, where they included some bits I think that were deliberately meant for kit bashing. If you had these guys just straight up look like 12th century knights, then they would be a little bit more limiting for kit bashing with things like Stargrave, with Frostgrave, what have you. But the sculpting this here is very nice in terms of crispness, especially on the chainmail, like where it connects up here. You don't see any of like the rounded edges like you might see on some very early sets or from maybe some other manufacturers. But it's nice sharp cutoff there, which is what I would like to see. The surcoats themselves, I guess let's talk about the design here of the armor, because what they've done here for all of them, you can see, is they've gone with a like coat of plates sort of style. And my understanding with coat of plates certainly works in a fantastical setting like a fantasy world, is that I think there's actually some historical debate about whether these ever really existed. So it's cool to see them here, because you're not going to find them on another like proper historical set from, say, your War Games Atlantic, Victrix, Fireforge games. So it's neat to see them here. I almost wish they would have embraced it fully though, because like I think the strongest sculpts are these two that you can see are totally covered in these plates. I guess there's like a little gap there, but that's fine. And these ones here, you can see like the front of the surcoat is smooth, and you wouldn't expect like a ton of folds there because it's layered over chainmail, but it'll make it very easy to paint. But it feels like it's screaming for just like more coats of plate or more plates like sewn in there. So again, I think there maybe was some decision about trying to keep these somewhat generic in order to be useful for kit bashing purposes. But again, that's not a objective criticism. Subjectively, I just would have liked these guys all to have full coats of plate like that, because I think it's just a neat and unique design. Now let's talk heads. So I mentioned there are 10 heads on the sprue, which mirrors a lot of the Oathmark sets, certainly the earlier ones. Slightly fewer heads than what you would get on some of the newer heavy infantry sets. But what is here, let me zoom in here, is quite nice. So we saw one kind of example of this face mask helm on the medium infantry that looked quite like this one, but I think this is a resculpted version of the same concept. And then the other ones are these, like, again, Skyrim-y is kind of the feeling I get from it, looking helms here, and they look really, really cool. And there's enough, if you were curious, there's 5 heads that are this face mask style, slightly different, like, helmet design on them. But, and then there are 5 that are different styles of armor. So this guy actually reminds me of like a head that comes in the light infantry set, but the coif that goes around is chainmail in this case. There's 2 heads that are unarmored. These 2 here. This one has a hat on. And then this one over on the right, I can't quite tell what that is. I think it's supposed to be maybe like a Saxon style helmet design. So this too, I think it works just fine for the set. Like if you're just going to pick these up and not kit bash it with anything else, these heads work great. And as I said, you have enough of those face mask helms, some more examples down here again, to equip everybody with a fully enclosed face mask, if that's what you want to do. However, the unarmored helmets, like this one here and this one down here, don't really do anything for me that the like medium and the light infantry sets don't already do. So perhaps just swapping those out for a couple more, even just face mask helm variants, or some more heavy heads, like this one here with the chainmail wrapped around, would have been nice inclusions, especially considering that there's only 10 heads in this set versus, say, like 14 that we see in the Orc heavy infantry set. But as I said, what is here is the sculpting on it's excellent. It's very nicely done. Now let's talk about weapons, because weapons are kind of the staple of the heavy infantry sets. They're broken up into 2 categories. Typically there is a 2-handed weapon or a great weapon, and then there are single-handed weapons which could be used in conjunction with these shields. So the composition is actually different on kind of across all 3 of these heavy sets I keep referencing, but the number of weapon arms is the same. So you're going to get 5 2-handed weapons, and on this set that's broken up as 2 axes. You can see kind of like a Dane axe style design here and here. And note too the position of the arms. We'll look at this at the assembly phase too, but they're actually all in different poses too, which is really neat. Again, going back to these having less armor, like they don't have any shoulder pads sculpted on either, which we see on some of the other sets. Again, that's not even a critique at this point. It's more just an observation that if you're looking for these guys to be like kitted out in plate mail, I don't think that was the intent with these compared to some of the other heavy sets. This is, again, maybe supposed to be something bridging a gap between a medium and a very heavy armor build. So 2 of these great axe designs. There is actually 2 of these great maces. So there's one here and then one here, which differs from the other 2 sets, which both had a single 2-handed mace, or great mace, if you will. There's then one 2-handed sword down here. And I really like the design on this. I just maybe wish it was a tad bigger, like maybe like 15% longer. Because this is almost like a Claymore style design, but it's like the length of a 1.5-hand sword. But again, I think that it's a nice clean design to it. So again, one 2-handed greatsword down here. There's one over here that it could very easily just be used as a regular gut, but it's clearly intended as a champion's sword, but same style as this one here that's held in 2 hands. This one's just held aloft. So from there, for single-handed weapons, you've got 3 of these swords over here, and note that there's actually a subtle difference in design to all 3 of these, which is cool. So 3 swords held in the right hand. There is a single axe and then a single mace, I really like this bearded axe design style here too. And then there's one left-handed axe. So you can have that on your champion guy. You can have a dude with an axe in both hands if you want. Whatever you choose. There's one command bit down here for a standard. And then there are 5 shields, so enough for everybody. There's been chatter about these shields about, it seems like there's 2 camps. Either you love them or you hate them. And I'll even concede that, like, when I first saw these shields, they weren't my favorite, but they've really grown on me, having, like, built-in paint some of these figures up to the point now where, like, I hope Northstar sells these separately because I'm trying to, like, scrounge up some more. I will say, too, the shield designs are actually different across all of their sets. So we have one example here from the human medium infantry, where you see there's banding, but there's nothing in the center. There's like that cross section on these heavy shields just to make them look more reinforced. And then the light infantry shield, by contrast, is this same design but without the banding going around the outside. So nice too, even just to be able to mix those in within a unit to have different styles of the same, or I should say different variants of the same style of shield. It's pretty cool. And that's it. So that's the Sprue. So as they sit, I think they look very nice and detailed. I'm eager to put some of these together. So let me cut here. I'm going to do that. I'll assemble these figures, and I've got a lot of kit bashing to do. So I'll see you in a second. All right, I've built a lot of figures for you guys. I hope you're settled in. So I will concede that despite, my own personal bias, that I wish that there was some more plate armor, these guys all assembled look suitably heavy, especially with these enclosed face mask helms. I'm glad too, they're clearly historically inspired, but that is a fantasy take on some actual, like, medieval helmets. That's not just, another 12th century, 13th century knight helm. That it does look more fantastic. I think these look so good all put together. I said in my last video too that Northstar does such a good job with their 2-part weapon arms. Certainly for Stargrave with all the firearms that they have, but even these great sword arms, great weapon arms were really easy to go together. So again, these first 3 are just straight out of the box. And yeah, I think they look fantastic. Again, my only quibble is I do wish I had like a dagger or a scabbard or something to glue onto them, but I've got tons in my bits box that I can draw from, and it's not strictly necessary. And as I said, I don't even like painting them anyway. So now we're getting into some conversions. So this is a body from the heavy infantry. The arms and the head are from the knights set to make some kind of like town guard, or knight set from Frostgrave, I should say. I think those sets complement each other very nicely. Sticking with Frostgrave, this is the Soldiers set. Arms and a head from the Soldiers set. And this is maybe the only place where the head looked a little small to me, but again, that's the very first Frostgrave set that ever came out, so not a huge surprise. Here is arms and a head from the human medium infantry. It's just called human infantry. But it's their medium infantry if you want to make like a heavy spearman, maybe. I think that worked alright. This is a body from the heavy infantry. Arms and the head are from Wargames Atlantic, actually. The head is from their medieval knights. Like the fantasy head from their medieval knights. And the arms and the shield, I think, are from their foot sergeants. But the scale, I think, works fine here to make like a dismounted Bretonnian knight. And here we're going into some Stargrave, Necromunda maybe conversion. So this is arms, the head from the Stargrave Scavengers that you will know that I'm a massive fan of if you've been watching the channel for a while. The backpack is actually from the Soldiers set. See, they're all starting to blend now because they're all great and they all have got some really cool accessory bits, but I thought that worked really well. Here is a body. This is a Frostgrave soldier. Arms and a head from this set. Let's make a slightly more professional looking soldier there. Thought he looked cool. Still going, guys. Got a few more for you. So this is actually a Victrix medieval foot knight. There are a couple of bodies in that set that are just all chainmail. So this is my all chainmail guy. Arms and head are from this heavy infantry set, of course. So I thought he looked pretty cool. Took just a little bit of shaving down on the arms to get him to fit. But otherwise, very simple conversion. Here we're going back to Oathmark. So this is an Oathmark medium infantry, arms and a head from this set. I'll tell you too, if you don't like these face mask helms, that's fine. I think they're fantastic. I really, really like the design here. As I said, it's like a fantasy take on some real historical helmet examples, and I think they look really cool and kind of imposing looking. This is an inverse of my earlier Wargames Atlantic conversion. This is a Wargames Atlantic guard body with arms and head from this set. You can see these arms and heads really go with just about everybody from a scale standpoint. They are a little heroically proportioned, which I like. Certainly at the tabletop level they stand out better. But I think they scale up great. We're still going. This is a Frostgrave Knight, arms and a head from this set. Of all of the conversions, I think that this set blends particularly well with the Frostgrave Knight set. And if you watch that review, you'll know that my only real criticism of it was that it didn't feel like heavily armored enough. And I now realize, seeing this conversion, that I think it was the heads. Like, I just wasn't a huge fan of some of the kind of like tropier fantasy heads that came in that set. So with the great weapon arms and the head options from this set, I think it really elevates that set to make them look more like knights, in my opinion. But again, that's also my more grounded fantasy bias that I'm looking for. This is a Oathmark heavy elf with arms and a head from this set. So I thought that worked well too if you wanted like a unit champion guy to be with a plate cuirass. Again, it has some sculpted greaves as well. A couple more here. So this is a Oathmark human light infantry. This is mostly just to show scale. I do think that the earlier sets are a little smaller, like we saw with the Frostgrave soldiers. And I think the head's a little bit smaller, not like outrageously so, but here I think the arms and the head are a little bit bigger. But they work just fine. Of course, I don't know that you'd want to put chainmail arms on this body, but again, I'm just trying to show proportions for you guys. And then lastly, here is a Oathmark human cavalry body, arms from this set. The head, if I were wagering, I think this is actually a Fireforge Games medieval knight helm. So that worked all right as well. Very versatile. I think that these are a lot of fun to put together. That's why I made so many, was because I just had a blast putting them together. But anyway, we'll get to that in the end. Let me throw them on the Lazy Susan and show you how they scale up. Alright, let's go for a little spin here. So the bare plastic models are from this human heavy infantry set. The ones that are primed in white have the name of either a range or manufacturer listed in red on the base. Pay attention to the fact that some of these miniatures have those splash or puddle bases on them, whereas others don't. These Oathmark figures do. But I think they scale great with just about everybody. You know too, if you've been watching the channel, that I'm a big fan of having varied heights within particularly my human infantry projects, just because humans are all different heights, right? So I actually like mixing and matching between manufacturers for exactly that reason. But you'll find that these are about the same height as all the historical plastics, with slightly more heroic proportions to them. So what's the final verdict? It was certainly worth the wait. It is excellent. You can see it kit bashes with everything kit bashes with it. The generic approach to their design, as ever, has made it to where it's going to be an incredibly versatile and useful set for a whole host of different projects, from role-playing games, obviously Oathmark, but Warhammer Fantasy, if you're an Empire player, if you're a Bretonnian player, Mordheim. I mentioned role-playing like D&D. I'm even doing like Stargrave, Necromunda conversions out of this. It's really, the sky's the limit here, because they've deliberately designed it in such a way that it's, I actually, in my notes, I just looked back at it, I wrote down ruthlessly versatile. So I might try to trademark that term, but that certainly applies here as well. Now, had North Star consulted me, my consulting rate is free, by the way, but had they consulted me and said, Dan, how do we make this set perfect? I would have said, give me 2 more, armored face mask helms, give me like 3 sword scabbards, maybe a little bit more armor on the legs. Does that break the set? No, absolutely not. Those are quibbles. It does not matter. Pick this set up. It's fantastic. I've got a link down in the description to the North Star site if you want to check this out. They usually have some early pre-order bundles. I'm curious to see too if they're going to have a new human army bundle, because that's always my recommendation with North Star sets, is that they're fantastic on their own, but they are just exponentially better when you start kit bashing them together. So if you can, try to get into a position where you can pick up at least 2 sets. Again, we saw how strong the combination of like the Frostgrave Knights and this set is, certainly any of the other Oathmark human range, once you're able to start like mixing bits back and forth, because all the arm and the head attachment points are the same, they just become that much better. So check them out. Again, link down below. Once again, massive thanks to North Star for sending these to us to look at, and for us to look at it early. Huge thanks on behalf of myself and I think the community as well. Appreciate it. Appreciate all you for dropping by for this one. In the meantime, tons more review content to come. And until next time, happy gaming.